I wanted to get into this because I was doing a little bit of work over the weekend, because that's just what I do. Doing a little bit of work over the weekend, pulling out the core elements, as in, if I had to not talk about anything else, if I just had to do some training for recruiters and I had to strip it down to the bare minimum, if I only had 6 things available to me, what would I talk about? And a couple of them were obvious. Well, they were obvious to me, which was rapport and questioning. Then it was all the elements of precision, empathy, amplify, and all the elements of summarize, advise, and question, P and SAC. And then I realized that a big part of everything that I do is based around what I call the perfect pitch, something I used to call a chunk of belief. And it's part of, when I say everything, I mean everything. It's how I do email marketing, it's how I do websites, it's how I do sales pages, it's how I structure a cold call, it's how I design a stand-up pitch to a committee or a board, it's how I design a training course, be it a 15-minute online thing or a 3-day in real life session. It's how I do my follow-up emails, it's how I market my candidates, it's how I sell my clients to my candidates. It's literally everything that I do is based around this thing called the perfect pitch, which started out as a pun but turns out to be absolutely true, because the perfect pitch structure is designed to give somebody everything that they need in order to want something, to believe in the idea, and to decide to go ahead. So it's not a very complicated structure, because when you really understand something, I don't know if any of you got real, genuine, deep down expertise in something, but almost everything, once you've got to a certain level, it becomes simple. It becomes not about how to do it, it becomes about the best way to do it. And the more you become an expert in anything, the simpler it becomes. I'm told it's true of maths, though I'm not up to that level. I'm told it's true of physics and chemistry. It's true of systems analysis. It's true of almost everything. The better you get at something, the simpler it becomes, because you've got past all the confusion as you can get to the simplicity. Well, this is the simplest way of taking somebody from doing something else or not wanting to do a thing to deciding to do a thing, to believing that it's the right thing to do, and to be able to sell that thing or that idea to somebody else and get an action from somebody. And it's such a great structure because it's built around all the elements of human psychology. It's not based on, oh, that's easy to teach. It's not based, because it isn't actually. It's not based on, oh, that sounds good, or that reads well, or that's a nice little acronym like FAB, feature, advantage, benefit. It's not a nice acronym, but it's damned solid behavioral psychology. So let me just sort of walk you through where I got it from, just for a second. I learned this initially as a structure through my work in, of all things, hypnosis, because yes, amongst many other things, I am a hypnotist. And when I first got into this, I then started looking at people who create massive transformation very quickly. And that included people like Tony Robbins and all sorts of other people, and looking at not just what they do, but the real deep down detail of how they did it. So I don't know if you've ever been to someone like Tony Robbins, but a Tony Robbins session in London will have about between 6, 7, 10,000 people in a big auditorium. And my partner and I, you could always spot us because we were the ones facing the wrong way and looking at the crowd, because we were watching for the reaction. We're watching for the what techniques, what words, what ways of doing things created the impact with people. So yeah, I'm sure we looked really weird, other than normal, but it was a great way to actually see what worked. And once you start studying how, all sorts of stuff become really obvious. So let me talk you through the process, and then I'll talk you through the process. So the perfect pitch, feel free to scribble this down, though it will be in the show notes, has only 4 stages to it: hook, story, facts, call to action. If you were attended or if you watched last week's replay all about story and metaphor, that's where it fits into this structure. Hook, story, facts, call to action. You can't take out any of those pieces. It's not a good idea to change the sequence of those pieces. You can, but I wouldn't recommend it, because there'll be a bit of somebody's emotional framework. I know I was talking about fields. There'll be a bit of someone's emotional framework or their belief structure or their decision structure that doesn't quite fit, because each of those elements, hook, story, facts, call to action, is designed to do a specific thing in a specific sequence. That's the syntax. If you're familiar with study of languages, but syntax, personally I try not to pay syntax because it would come in expensive, but syntax, the sequence in which you do things. So children eat free, good. Eat children free, less good. So the syntax of the perfect pitch matters. Hook is designed to get someone to go, huh, like a dog pricking its ears up. Oh, okay, that might be interesting. That would be good. What did you just say? They don't believe a word of it, but it's got their attention. That's the hook. If you're doing an email campaign, that's your subject line. It's the hook. Oh, it might be the first sentence as well. But basically it's, oh, if you're designing a web page, it might be the first image, it might be the big headline, any number of things. If it's a pitch to a person, it's what you say once you've got past the polite, once you've got past the conversational stuff, the get to know you stuff. It's how you take it from a chat to, we're talking about this thing. So in the context of most influential conversations, it's going to come after the fact find, it's going to come after the questions, it's probably going to come after the P, precision, empathy, amplify. It may come after summarize, advise, question, but more likely, woof bark, but more likely it will come in the middle of summarize, advise, question. Because what I'm going to do with this session, I'm going to get into some stuff that I rarely talk about, because if I do it wrong, it gets confusing as hell for people. So I'm going to try and make sure it's structured and makes sense for you. So if you think about summarize, advise, and question, summarize, replay back what you've said or what's happened or what they've said, so they'll agree with it. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. And then because of that, if you've studied with me previously, or if you've gone through straight line recruitment, you'll see a lot, you'll understand what I'm talking about with because. Everything that comes after a because is assumed to be something that is true and that you should take action on. So if they agree with you, because they'll tend to agree with you. So what you can do with the perfect pitch is summarize back, and then because of that, and then you start with a hook. So you summarize, let's say you're talking with a prospect. You're going to pitch your, for want of a better term, you're going to pitch your recruitment service. Summarize back the problems they're having, summarize back the kind of people they want and the way that they want to experience that recruitment process, and what difference it will make for them. And then because of that, what I suggest is hook, a big statement. What I suggest is we work together to halve the time it takes you to recruit and at the same time bring in far better candidates. I've probably got somebody's attention at that point. A hook is a big fat claim. It's a big fat claim that they don't have to believe, but it does have to make their ears perk up. It does have to get their attention. So the hook, if you want to put an acronym next to it, is a BFC, not big friendly giant, a big fat claim. Oh, Lord. Then we're into the story. And if you want to get really sophisticated with it, you can link to the story with another because. So because of that, why don't we look to halve the time it takes you to recruit and improve the quality at the same time? The reason I say that is because when we were working with this company, or when we were in a similar situation previously, what we've done is, and you take them into a case study, you take them into an example, you take them into a story. Because if you're replaying a memory of what you've done for somebody else, it's a story. You're not just relaying the facts. It's not just we did this, and this. It's the story of. It's this is what happened. This is the situation they were in. And these are the problems they were facing. And what we decided to do was this. And then once we've done that, this is what happened. And after that, we came up with this kind of result. It's the story. Now, the story stage is designed to do one thing and one thing only. It's to make them want to believe it's true and to give them an emotional desire for that outcome. It's not about the process, it's the emotional desire for the outcome. So the hook gets their attention, particularly if it comes after a summary and a because. You can then go because again and take them into the story. Typically, in business, it will be a case study. It will be a testimonial. Fair warning to everybody, I am going to be going around over the next 10 days collecting as many testimonials as I possibly can, preferably on video because I'm rebuilding a couple of my sales pages. I'm going loud on the membership for the academy. You can't say I didn't warn you. So the case study, the example, the testimonial takes you through the journey that somebody else has been on and the results that they got at the end of that journey. Now, there's a lot of stuff, if you go on the interweb and if you look at marketing advice, or if you go into YouTube and you look for marketing, you'll get a lot of stuff about story selling. I'm a big fan of story selling. The great book I recommended last week called Story Brand. And story selling, particularly pushed out because a chap called Russell Brunson created a SaaS company called ClickFunnels, and he went really loud. He's less in your face these days than he used to be, but he really popularized this concept of story selling. And if you're telling a story about how somebody else was having a struggle and they had this problem and then they couldn't work out a solution to it and they were on the last legs and everything was horrible. And then what they found was somebody recommended that they try this product and they experienced using this product. And once they did, all these wonderful and amazing things happened. And that's fabulous. If you're selling to a person, what they're basically taking you through is the hero's journey. They're taking you through the process of most myths, the story of most great movies, the story of epics. I'm not suggesting that the case studies or testimonials that they give aren't true. I'm quite sure they are. But that story arc of despair, discovery, success, build on the success is a fairly common story arc. You can do exactly the same with a case study of a company or of a person. They were in this situation and they've been trying to get their recruitment processes sorted out. And it was horrible because all that happened was they got hundreds of CVs, hundreds of resumes in, and they were typically rubbish. And they spent hours and weeks and months plowing through all this dead wood just to find the one or two green shoots. And then what happened was somebody suggested that they try doing this instead. And what we were able to do together was build this system so that together the process resulted in them halving the time they took to recruit and improving the quality of the people that they brought in, because the story is designed to give an example of how you have already delivered the hook. So it, as what a comedian would call, it calls back. In training, it's called a loop. You open the loop. I'd love this to be true. I'm interested. You've got my attention. You then walk your way through it with the story. And then that story, at the end of it, the company or the person gets the result that you've promised in the hook. So there's a system there. Now, why don't we stop there? What's the rest of it for? Well, it's actually really simple. If you're selling to a person, you possibly can stop there. You know, if you're selling life insurance to a person, if you're selling an Audi to somebody who's got the money for it, okay, yeah, you know, if there's nobody else that they have to involve in the decision, that's rarely a realistic situation. But, you know, it could be. If you're just selling to an individual, then you can possibly just go hook and story. But if you're selling to somebody in a business or an organization, you're going to have to support them with facts. You're going to have to tell them what happened, how long it took, what the investment was, how long it took to get the results, what the payback was. You're going to have to give them some facts, because the person that you're talking to is going to have to sell this idea or enthuse about this idea to somebody else. They're going to have to take the idea to the chief exec or the HR director or the finance director or somebody to get them involved and get them signed off. Or possibly you're talking to the chief exec and they're going to have to talk to the line managers or the internal talent acquisition team, and they're going to have a conversation about this. And if all you've armed them with is 3 or 4 really good case studies and 3 or 4 really great stories, they're going to have a bit of a hard time in the meeting. Because in business, let's face it, we like some facts, we like some numbers, we like some figures. Yeah. So having been through this process with, well, I've been doing it for this particular structure for 20 years now. I've taught it to 50-odd thousand recruiters and about the same again of salespeople from different industries. And all the experience and all the feedback I've got from all those people over that kind of time tells me that we need the facts, because otherwise our enthused contacts with all their belief in what we're talking about can't sell it to anybody else, because the numbers, the facts, the stories, the research, all that logical stuff closes the loop for other people. So if you want to get into the psychology of it a little bit, we slap somebody in the front brain with the hook. We then talk to their creative, emotional parts, right brain, with the story. We then talk to their logical, left-hand brain with, now that right brain, left brain thing isn't fact quite true, but it's not a bad metaphor. So we talk to their right brain with story. We talk to their left brain, their logic, rational side, with facts, and that closes everything off. I'd love it to be true because of the hook. Because of that, here's an example, here's a story. Oh, that would be amazing. Well, if it's worked for them, it should work for me because I'm in a very similar situation. Now here's some proof, here's some rational facts and figures so that you can feel secure about it. And if you want to, you can also sell it back in. Now, the other thing about that structure, case study, story, and facts, you're also giving people a massive dose of social proof. If you've followed through on the book recommendations I've been doing the last couple of weeks, Robert Cialdini's Influence, Science and Practice used to have 6 laws of influence. Now it's got 7 because he's included we, creating a team. But the structure of that social proof is massively important. Replay back what I've just been doing, by the way. I said that you need facts and figures and examples, and you need to know what's gone on. And then I told you about 20 years working with 50,000 recruiters and 50,000 people in other industries. And then I explained more of the stuff. Now, the last stage, I'd love it to be true. Oh, that's fantastic. I can relate to that because they're just like me. Oh, that's why it works. Oh, that explains it. What do I do now? That what do I do now is the call to action. Never let somebody just sit there thinking, oh, what now? The number of emails I see from people, the number of e-shots where people don't literally tell somebody what to do. If you want somebody to call you, tell them to call you, give them your direct line or your mobile number. If you want somebody to email, tell them to email, and don't just say hit reply. Actually put your email address there, because again, they might need to forward it to people. So your call to action should be specific. If you're talking with somebody in a pitch situation, you're trying to sell somebody on your services, that call to action will be, why don't we get started straight away? Let's get the terms of business signed off now. And what we can then do is I can start first thing tomorrow morning, specifying the kind of candidates you need, and I can start searching for them next week. How does that sound? That call to action. Let's get the terms of business signed off now. That way I can start the process tomorrow and we can get cracking on with it. That is all designed to take somebody from, oh, that'd be amazing, to let's do it. Screw it, let's do it. Story arc, the story and the facts are designed to make the link between I'd love that to be true and let's do it. Now, here's where you can get really fun with it. Please, once. I rarely talk about this, but I don't often make the explicit link between summarize, because of, and then the advice being a story. But once you've got good with the hook, story, facts, call to action, you can then start to do something that's really cool and really powerful, which is called nesting. Not in the sense of building yourself a nice home or a nice environment, though if you do this right, you can have a nice home and a nice environment. Hell, if you do this right, you can have a nice anything. But in the sense of layering things, it's got layers. So what you can do is hook. What we're going to be looking at is halving the time of recruitment and improving the quality of your candidates massively at the same time. And then you start out with a case study. But then you don't quite finish the case study, because what that also reminds you of it with another, because it's similar to this and it's similar to that. If you look at really, really good sales pages on the internet, one of the best places, by the way, I'm, as you will have gathered, I've no doubt, I'm a proper nerd. So I love doing my research. I love doing a deep dive into things. If I pick up a theme on YouTube, I can be there for a week. But if you look at some really good sales pages, and I've haunted people's sales pipeline, their marketing pipelines, what you'll notice with some of the really good ones, I mean, I'll throw out some names. I don't know if you'll recognize them or not, but Dean Graziosi, Amy Porterfield, Brendan Burchard, Tony Robbins, Russell Brunson, those kind of people, if you actually look at their pages, they use this structure. They use it explicitly. They follow it in a specific way. But what they'll also do is start talking about something. They'll start talking about how they first discovered this, how they first identified that it was possible. And they'll start into that story, and then on their sales page, they'll then link into another thing that happened while they were doing this. So they'll go from hook to get your attention, then they'll start talking about story A, and then they'll start talking about story B. And then some of the really good people start talking about story C, and they'll finish B, they'll finish C, and then they'll bring you back to finish story A. Now, the reason I say you have to get good at this first, you have to, actually that's not true, you don't have to get good at this, you have to get superbly good at this first, because otherwise you'll just get lost. But once you've got good at it, you start story A, you introduce story B, you introduce story C, you come back to finish story A, just like a callback. Just if you go and see a really great comedian, and they'll start a thing and then they'll come back to it 45 minutes later. I once saw Eddie Izzard do an hour-and-a-half gig, and after an hour and a half, he brought it back to the first line. It looked like complete improvisation. Obviously wasn't, because I saw him twice, and he brought it back to the same point in the same way every time. So that structure, why would you do that? Well, if you just leave a story out there, you've been a child. You may not have children, or you may not borrow them with permission. But if you've got kids, what do you do at night? Well, these days, I don't know, maybe you just set them up with a game and let them entertain themselves. But what I used to do with my kids, and what was done with me, though, I'm a Gen X, I was raised a bit feral, practically raised ourselves. But in my case, I told my kids stories. And both of my children, my son and my daughter, my son's now 28, my daughter's 19, but they were raised on The Hobbit. I told you I was a nerd. They were raised on The Hobbit. You don't read The Hobbit in one sitting. You get to the end. And if you get to the end of a really good story, or rather you get partway through a really good story, you don't even finish the chapter. You just get partway through. What happens overnight? It sits there and your imagination's coming back to it, and you're wondering what happens to Bilbo and the Hobbits. What happens when they meet Tom Bombadil? What happens when all this stuff, yeah? So if you start a case study with somebody, but you don't quite finish it, and then you go into an explanation of something else that you did with another case study, and then you drop into another case study, and then you come back and finish off the first one. As you finish that first case study, you can almost hear this clang as the penny drops. Because while you've been talking about B and C, the prospect or the candidate's brain has been whirring away about story A. If you're talking to a candidate and you start talking about somebody that you recruited last year for a similar sort of role, and what happened with them was they were in there 6 months, and after 6 months, they got this amazing opportunity. But let me tell you about somebody else I was talking with, who's been working with them for a few years. And then I come back to, oh yeah, this person, after 6 months, they got this amazing opportunity. And you can almost see people go, it's good. Finish the story. So I explicitly use exactly the same structure for pitching candidates, pitching roles to candidates, pitching candidates to clients, pitching my services. I'm using the word pitch because it's common parlance. if you do this right, it feels nothing like a pitch. It just feels like a chat. Because if you remember, we start with the summary, then the because, then the story, the facts, the call to action. So it just feels like a bit of a chat. But at the end of it, you've given somebody everything they need to want it, to believe it will work, and to be able to rationalize it, as in rationalize it, so that they can explain it to themselves, they can explain it to their spouse, they can explain it to their dog or their colleagues or their internal talent acquisition team. Oops, did I just connect dogs and internal talent acquisition? Sorry, that was bad. I didn't mean that. Nothing but respect for internal TA. But that's the structure that you use for it. Now, what I probably shouldn't go into, but I will do for just 1 minute. I mentioned to a couple of you guys is that I used to do the big events, 3-day events that start at 9 o'clock on Tuesday, and they would finish, they start at 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning, and they would finish at 6 o'clock on Friday evening. And it was 9 till 11, 8:30 till 10:30, 9 till 6. Big chunk of time. And everything that I did, every skill that I taught, every strategy that I went into, every element was built around stories. So I would talk about something. I would say, look, I'm going to talk about how you deliver the perfect pitch to somebody. And let me explain, where this came from. So if you rewind in your head, or if you rewind the replay and you go back to, I explained how this would work for you. And then I explained where it came from and how I studied Tony Robbins and how I looked at some great speakers and it's all through the process. And sometimes I would open a story, I would start a story on Wednesday morning and not finish it until Friday afternoon. And when we got there, you could just see people go, oh, because that idea has been ticking away in the back of their heads for 2.5 days. And then when you finish the story and you explained how that technique you've been talking about works and why it works, you can actually feel, hear, sense that idea dropping in and sticking. To do it that way takes a bit of time, but if you're dealing with a client on a long-term basis, if you're dealing with a candidate over a recruitment cycle, you've got time. You've not just got a conversation. Once you really start mastering this, once you've nailed it, you can layer this over several conversations. You can layer it over an entire relationship with somebody. If you tell somebody a really good story, a really good case study, a really good example, when you're first starting to work with them, and then you come back to it 3 or 4 calls later, there'll be this instant sense of familiarity that fires off in their head. And it makes them feel much more comfortable about the fact that you're consistent and congruent, that your words and your actions meet. Because if you just made this BS up, you won't be able to come back to it 4 or 5 conversations later, would you? So it gives somebody massive reassurance to go with all the other stuff that's already built up. So honestly, at this point, I don't expect you to have taken all that in, because I've thrown a lot of stuff out there. But it's going to be there on the replay as of about 10:30 this evening. It'll be there on the replay, and I'm there either by email or preferably in the community. Here's my request to you. Let's get really specific. Let's do your candidate e-shots. Let's do your sales pages. Let's do your cold call scripts. Let's do your conversations. Let's do your candidate screening. Let's do your pre-screens. Let's do all of it using this structure. So come back to me. with your ideas. I'll come back to you with mine, and together, let's make this your way of working. This is just what you do and how you do it, because that's the only way to get really good at anything. It's just to practice until you can't get it wrong.